Exposing the Expositions, Chapter 7, read by and narrated by author Howdy McCoskey. Mudflood terms. You might think of this chapter as an extended glossary, providing detail on the words and terms being used by the current alternative historical community. This does not mean I agree with everything, but that I want to lay out background of these theories behind the words so you see what is being used. The first term that needs to be defined is alternative history itself. The term alternate history previously was applied to specific fiction writers who used historical events but added a twist, such as Germany invades and captures England in 1940 or John Kennedy does not die in 1963. While these provide interesting reading, that is not what is being referred to here. This term is now mostly used to refer to the theories of Anatoly Fomenko, a Russian mathematician and statistician. He developed a theory that he called the New Chronology after working in Soviet intelligence in the 1970s studying Western newspapers for misinterpretations. He began to believe that history was also greatly misinterpreted. He was not the first to have this idea. One of the early originators of the theory was Jean Hardin, a French Jesuit scholar in the late 17th century. In his Chronologiae ex numinis antiquis restituti of 1696, he claimed, quote, that with the exception of the works of Homer, Herodotus, and Cicero, the natural history of Pliny, and the Georgics of Virgil, and the satires and epistles of Horace, all the rest of the ancient classics of the Greece and Rome were manufactured, i.e. forged, by Benedictine monks. End quote. From reading similar theories, Fomenko published several 700 to 800 page volumes of his chronology. Its core is to present a historical timeline that is much shorter than normal history, with the majority of historical events, from the Middle Ages to ancient Egypt, falling in the period of our AD 1000 to 1500. While I agree with this basic premise, there are major problems with his standard historical timeline. I personally do not agree with his revised presentation, or such claims as Napoleon's French army building the Egyptian pyramids. That, however, does not mean that much of what he's presenting is not worthy of examination, for it is. Like anything, one will bring wisdom to, and will also bring error into their research, my book included. Use his work as another tool on the path to understanding the path. Originally in this book, I went into a long discussion about his claim that 1,000 years was added to the history in the 1500s after the Council of Trent in 1545 in northern Italy, put into place via the transition from the Julian calendar to the Gregorian. This included ideas of the difference between a 1500 date and a J500 or I500, which became labeled as 1500 to historians in the future. This entire theory is one that I don't want to get into detail here, just mention it as a potential interesting area of study should you wish to continue along that path. This original chapter also went into a long discussion of the need to study ancient sites in person, to study their energy structures as well as the building conditions. But I want to return to information that was more related to the Expositions and the period of the 1800s. Cathedrals and star forts. A lost type of technology seems to have existed in our recent past. Generally, it refers to such things as towers and domes, cathedrals and star forts, but it can also refer various applications from fireplaces to early transport. I now believe that cathedrals originally may have had nothing to do with religion. In fact, what we call Christianity might be a very recent invention. When this new religion, or what might be called a new form of a very old religion, took over, they merely converted the existing specifically designed buildings in all cities into modern churches. The Pantheon in Rome is a good example of a building with originally one purpose being taken over to become a church. I think all of the pre-1800 churches were the great energy centers of their day. When pyramids could no longer be built 4,000 years ago, the switch was made to large temple structures, such as Luxor and Karnak. This perhaps lasted 1,000 or 2,000 years when another change came. During the next phase of building came what we now call cathedrals. A major feature is their giant towers and domes used to bring down the energy of the atmosphere. To help this feature, the roofs of the towers or domes included some form of copper and often balls of liquid mercury. Sometimes the mercury was placed within vases and statues that lined the roof. Take a look under the dome of the German Reichstag, and one will find a very odd gigantic copper coil pointing down from the dome. It really makes no sense from the standpoint of ornamentation, but if the dome is actually a type of electrical energy generator, then it makes much more sense as to why such a copper coil would be present. I believe if we were allowed to a detailed examination of the world's great cathedrals, we would find similar things. Also, the cathedrals were constructed on top of an energy spot on the Earth in order to combine the energy from the ground with the sky. This energy could then be used by the building in question or amplified to be sent out to the entire city. The stone and its layout make the building a giant machine, which spirals the energy drawn from the earth and sky within the cathedral. It will then, perhaps after the addition of organ music, be sent out through the giant rose windows, which are made in the shape of cymatic wave patterns, into the city, now charged with a particular frequency. Each rose window is in fact a frequency projection device based on the geometric pattern on which it was formed. Added to this is the phenomenal carving that these cathedrals have, both inside and out, either in the form of decorative shapes or statues. While adding to the overall beauty, they are also there to act as energy resonators and amplifiers. Thus you must think of the cathedrals as vibrational generators, similar to a temple such as Karnak or Luxor, where every stone, relief, and carving is all a part of the generated vibrational energy makeup. There was a reason Pythagoras and Goethe both claimed that architecture was music frozen in stone. To add a bit of modern science to the discussion, I present three terms: magnetron, cathode, and resonance. A cavity magnetron is a high-powered vacuum tube that generates microwaves using the interaction of a stream of electrons with a magnetic field while moving past a series of open metal cavities. Electrons pass by the cavities and cause radio waves to oscillate within, similar to the way a whistle produces a tone when excited by an airstream blown past its opening. So what does all that mean? It means that the way the device is constructed will create and amplify a microwave frequency. An early form of the magnetron was invented in 1910 and another by General Electric in 1920, but it was not until the 1940s when German, Russian, and British researchers used these ideas to improve radar technology. The magnetron works with resonance, and any device that shows such properties is known as a resonator. In fact, many of the images of one, which look like a bullet hole of a revolver when looked straight on, also resemble to me the layout of the Pantheon in Rome. Musical instruments use acoustic resonators that produce sound waves of specific tones, while quartz crystals, used in electronic devices such as radio transmitters and quartz watches, will produce oscillations of very precise frequency. Some musical instruments generate the sound directly, such as the wooden bars in a xylophone, the head of a drum, the string in stringed instruments, or the pipe of an organ. Some modify the sound by enhancing particular frequencies, such as the sound box of a guitar or violin. Many 5-string banjos have removable resonators, so players can use the instrument with a resonator in bluegrass style or without it in folk music style. Very interesting is the cathode, which is a word very close to the word cathedral. A cathode was named by Michael Faraday in the 1830s and comes from the Greek word for descent, which is what the energy in one is doing. Perhaps the buildings were really called cathedrals at one time, or perhaps it was in these buildings where Faraday got his inspiration. It's very hard to explain what a cathode is, sort of like a battery, but it does mimic much of what the cathedrals might be doing. Recall that many cathodes use copper as their main actor. That would explain the need for cathedrals to have copper in their roofs. What is amazing is that this technology has been around us for hundreds of years and no one noticed until just recently. Another scientific term is the fractal tower, which uses a type of repeated triangle or square over and over to increase the amount of waves the antenna can receive while lessening its surface area. Many of the towers on top of cathedrals, castles, or palaces have this fractal appearance, as do many of the world's star forts. So what happened with all this energy being generated? On one hand, I think the energy is still being generated by the cathedrals. I've traveled across Europe checking great cathedrals, and generally, the level of energy that I notice within many of them is staggering. In fact, it seems like the large columns that run down either side of the nave are a part of the energy function to move what comes from the domes and towers to ground level. There are passages along either side, and I can at times feel the energy moving down these passageways as if the energy is circulating quickly. The pipe organs are not there for show. They were part of the original technology of the cathedral device. By adding an extra element of specific music vibration at very high doses, I think they could allow the generated energy to be projected out the rose windows. Tesla tower technology is basically what these cathedrals are doing. In fact, hospitals may not have been needed, as you just go to the cathedral for a while in order to be reharmonized. At times I still think that energy does go out of these structures, but except for those living close by, the energy will be dissipated as nothing outside the building is collecting it. A receiver of some type is needed to harness this energy. At one time, I believe the places people lived were set up in such a way to harness and use this energy being projected from the cathedrals. For example, in Nantes, I noticed, and then remembered in many other European cities I had visited, that most of the apartments all had iron bars in front of their windows. I do not think that is an accident. I think the iron was the conductor for the energy coming from the cathedrals. I think the energy was attracted to the iron, and then within each home was another device that might not have even been recognized as a device, but a simple household tool that could bring the energy from the iron gates inside, where everything needed to be powered had an inside energy source. I also want to point out that old ornate fireplaces that were found in palaces and early homes. What is most fascinating about them, more than their amazing intricate design work, was that they were unable to have wood burned in them, and they were far too big to keep any heat in the giant rooms even if wood could have been burned in them. Some, in fact, had no chimney. So these could not have been fireplaces as we have been led to believe, but some type of technology, where the towers or domes, often on the corner of these buildings, somehow had energy to these giant iron hot boxes. In some way they would heat up in the winter without the need for wood or coal, thus creating perfectly clean green energy. It seems that the paired ornaments in front of them, perhaps made of iron and copper, acted like an energy drawing device, similar to obelisks in front of Egyptian temples. This great technology was lost after the reset of the 1800s, and the fireplaces had become converted to burn coal and wood. There seems to have been utility poles way back in the 1860s. Old Russian photographs are good to find these. There are no wires attached to any of them, so they are not early telephone or telegraph lines. The suggestion is this energy transferred from the entry point cathedral or other tower or dome building to these poles, where each home or business could tap into the source. All wireless transmission, and all possibly free. The world is covered with star forts. Claimed to be built simply for defense, to have many cannons to fire off the same line, there is also some odd things that I never noticed about them. Firstly is their intricate geometric design patterns, similar in many cases to the beauty of the rose windows of cathedrals or snowflakes. Secondly, water always surrounds them. And finally, the stories throughout history of armies not being able to conquer them, no matter the weaponry at hand, such as Prince of Wales Star Fort in northern Manitoba. The research now seems to indicate that star forts did not provide a defensive protection, at least not how one thinks. Most early European cities were surrounded by a star fort protection, now mostly dismantled for expansive city building. Something about the shape not only created a harmonic energy pattern within the area of the walls, but also was seemingly able to protect the city, perhaps from energy or sound-related attacks. Bible stories such as a trumpet being used to knock down the walls of Jericho are not a simple metaphor. Sound has great power, and harnessed as a weapon, it is near impossible to stop. Cathedrals and star forts, along with their other purposes, may have helped to protect cities from sound or energy-based attacks, at least for a while. For, as the section coming up on fire seems to indicate, something was eventually able to penetrate these defenses. The star forts are laid out as a worldwide grid, and they may interact with each other. Thus, the more star forts that were active and being used might have in a sense made each of the series stronger, operating almost like a giant set of interconnected batteries. Art. I want to present why this ancient architecture is important from the standpoint of energy and psychology. When we see any modern building, such as the new Chicago Federal Building of the 1860s, mentioned in Chapter 3, it is only the functional use of space. It is in fact devoid of soul, devoid of energy, because it is not built from ancient principles. Now look again at a building from 1908. It has energy and life and more. It is more alive, bringing Greece, Rome, and Egypt to our doorsteps and lives. And that is because I do not think these older buildings are emulating a style from the ancient world. They may have been part of that same world. The builders of the modern fairs were far closer to the time of the Parthenon in Greece than the later modern building. Not only have we been lied to, we may have had the very structures that create harmony, healing, and balance taken away. They were not just things to look nice, though great effort was done just to do that. Their entire layout, geometry, use of Tesla energy, sound cymatics, and the like went into them. It might have just been a courthouse after the reset of the 1850s, but what it was before that is unknown. Perhaps a part of a giant whole of the harmonic principles equal to what can be found at Chartres, the Duomo, Luxor Temple, or any other great edifice can be found in all of these buildings. These truly were temples, and we're losing the few that are left. How soon might all the memory of these buildings be gone, lost in the tenor that the same as modern art, where a few black lines drawn on a canvas are now the new federal building? I never understood why this was true until I ran into the book Serpent in the Sky by John Anthony West, who used an entire chapter to present how the ancients viewed art, which is not something to be looked at or to create certain feelings or ideas in the person looking at it, but was made to create universal harmony. The same principle in every single person viewing it should occur from the art. In fact, the very space on earth to harmonize sky and ground and person and animal in one infused harmonic whole. It can be seen in every statue or painting in Florence, every cathedral, every monastery. That was the old world, the world the modern has wanted to destroy. How the lines on a canvas can possibly compare to Da Vinci's Annunciation or Botticelli's Primavera is beyond me. It again shows just how many levels of brainwashing have occurred. Do not forget that one of the main financiers of modern art museums was John Rockefeller. He was not putting his money into something to help humanity, but to help his elite cause. Brainwash the people into thinking the old beauty needs to be destroyed or hidden in the back of a museum, while the new modern soulless junk is portrayed as the ideal. I saw this displayed again recently while on a research trip to Nantes, France. The main level of the art gallery is stunning. Beautiful ancient building with spectacular 16th and 17th century paintings. So perfect it appears as if the paintings are photographs, layered with symbolism and perfected geometry. Then my wife and I decided to take a quick look at the modern art section before we left. Well, of course, ugly. When we reached what is called the chapel, we got the shock of shocks. Here was a beautiful 1700s church that had most of its artwork and fine sculpture removed, though a few bits of it were still seen higher on the walls. What would have been an ornate ceiling was layered over with a series of wood planks. Inside were 40 television sets, all blaring children or older people, screaming or blowing whistles or cars exploding. This is what was being presented as art, while the very building used to present it in, an actual ancient art of soul and harmony, was mostly destroyed to showcase the modern mess. Nothing presented this loss and this brainwashing of the masses more clearly than this. Go to Nantes and see it, but start at the chapel and get that out of your system first. Finish your experience with 2 hours of the real beauty. That is where the power and the healing is, and that is what our world should, or at least seems used to be. Reset. In the alternate historical context, the word reset refers to something similar as it does in computer terminology. When your computer freezes, or the game you're playing is no longer interesting, you do a reset and start over from the beginning. This theory claims that a group of beings control the actions of this planet, or perhaps a series of cycles that are built into the timeline system and can be foretold. If it is a force or controlling group behind it, then it is quite clear that it has only one thing in mind: its own benefit and survival. When things seem to go too far, humans know too much of what is going on, the system is shut down and repopulated, with many simulations of how this is done. The surviving group is quickly made ignorant of the past and become unknowing slaves for the in-between elite. In our recent case, we have been given more daily chores to give the appearance of being completely free. In the 1800s, this can link to the strange orphan trains, seemingly thousands of children being sent on trains to western U.S. cities, though there's no real good answer as to where all these children came from, or why all of a sudden in the 1800s was a need for massive orphanages. It is like some sort of virus came and wiped out the adult population, leaving only tens of thousands of children alive. A population of just children would be rather easy to brainwash into believing any story of the past you wanted. The other thing that arises at this time are insane asylums, hundreds of them, all looking at like what we would call today giant palaces. First, why the need for so many, and why must they all rival Buckingham Palace for their size and ornateness? I think this was not their original function, but old buildings that were confiscated for a new purpose. The insane asylums were for anyone who was not agreeing with the new story being presented for history. If you remembered the old magnificence of the buildings and who really lived there and how to use the energy, you were put in the insane asylum so as no one could hear your old memories. The same thing basically happened to the native Indians, who were sent to reservations to be hidden away from the rest of society, and children sent to schools where they were tortured into forgetting everything about their culture. If you would not go along with the story, you were deemed crazy and sent to a mental hospital for reindoctrination, which is why so many asylums all of a sudden turn up. What we call natives might either be groups on the periphery of the old ancient civilization, a sort of land-nature direct caretaker for the main cities, or could in fact be the old civilization who survived the attacks, were driven out of their cities, and to survive as long as they could in the wilds. I also feel that stories, such as that of the Cathars and the Knights Templar and others, are not separate events, but are all part of the same destruction of humanity from the last reset, and may have taken place much later than currently presented, even as recent as between 1650 and 1812. Lastly, as mentioned previously, with so many photos of cities that are in perfect condition, with no construction of any kind happening, yet one thing is missing: life of any kind. No people, no horses, no garbage flying around, no smoke from chimneys, nothing to indicate life, like it's a photo of a computer-generated city we see in architectural plans. The standard claim for the lack of life was the long processing speed photography needed at the time or would create blurring. Okay, so where's the blurring? Or did they manage to send away the 250,000 people and horses and dogs and cats out of St. Petersburg for the day so they could take photos? It's the same with photos of Toronto, Boston, Paris, Helsinki, Rome, or San Francisco of the time, all resulting in a completely very lifeless city, similar to the massive Chinese cities of today that have been built but have no people living in them. I see several of these resets happening over history. One was at the end of the pyramid building period, another may have happened at the end of the temple building period, and another more recent one at the end of what we will call the post-Greco-Roman period. This theory leads far more credence to what we call life on Earth, more being some type of experiment or computer simulation, controlled by basic coding, laws of nature, that can get bent by outside forces to control the game or experiment as they wish. It seems we too have some ability to hack into the same mainframe as the controllers and alter things along the way. And people like the great alchemists, Pythagoras and such, each had learned their own way to hack into the mainframe of reality and make changes as needed. Some suggest another reset is coming, but I'm not so sure. If they happen when humans have too much control and power, then we would not be at the edge of such a thing because our current world is showcased by how little control and power the average human has. Or maybe humans are now close to opening a giant doorway of understanding, and a reset is required to block that from occurring. This is semi-speculation, of course. Time will tell what these resets were, and if another is indeed in our short-term future. Of course, one can understand what really gets reset in a reset can get a better indication of what exactly will be coming in the long term or the short term. Photography. Standard history claims photography as we know it was not invented until around 1800. The oldest surviving images are from 1826, and by 1840, photography had moved into a decent quality. That is a very fast movement for the technology, and the invention seems to coincidentally be created just at a time to produce images where history seems like it's being overturned, rewritten, and completely changed. But what if photography is a completely different history? What if it's much older? There were devices known as the camera obscura during the Renaissance. Da Vinci is claimed to have had one, or at least drawn the plans for one. Many drawings of the pre-photography era are incredibly detailed, might indicate that the artist was working with some type of photograph and did a partial tracing over the canvas to get the drawn-in image so correct. We have many instances of seeing this since 1850, where a drawing or postcard has been made and then a photograph was taken, then a photograph was found from where the postcard image was taken from. There's an example here of a postcard and a photograph of the San Francisco Exposition of 1915. The postcard is an obvious drawing coloring in of the photograph, just with the woman in front on the front right of the photo removed. It is amazing, actually, to not even show an overlay or anything. So good is the Photoshop type edit done here in 1915. So we have to question all of the drawings we have. We can find similar drawing copies from the 1800s that are almost near exact copies from real photographs. Look back to the drawing of the supposed raising of Chicago in 1858 in Chapter 3. We have the drawing, but we also have the one that was the original photograph that the drawing was modeled from. And we can see that the drawing has been greatly dramatized, in fact made inaccurate from the photo to try to present the story wanted rather than the fact. So how many more photos from the past really exist? How far back does photography go? Some now suggest it might go back at least to the Greek age in some form, for Plato could have not written his analogy of the cave without understanding some of what we call the modern camera and motion pictures. If photography is much older than believed, and if you have access to a photograph from say 1700, it could be easy to take it and claim it is from 1870, because no one could believe that there's a photo from before 1850. Just because we have an old photo and it's presented to be dated to a certain year, all we really know is that we have an image. We cannot be really sure of the date the image was taken, only the date currently presented to us, which may or may not be correct. So back to the early photographs of ornate buildings with little around them. Perhaps the photos are hundreds of years older than claimed. Could the Vatican and Smithsonian not just be hiding all the great books and manuscripts of the past? Might they also be storing all the early photographs? If an ancient people had the technology to build these massive buildings, would they have not also have had photographic equipment as well? The photos were preserved, just like we do, then later used by the new controllers to present ancient buildings as modern by revealing a building photograph. No one would question that it had to be from 1854 or earlier because no one was supposed to have cameras before that. City fires. I've mentioned many times that it seems every city in North America had a great fire between 1800 and 1910. Okay, not seems, they did. Toronto, Boston, Philadelphia, Portland, Ottawa, Jacksonville, Seattle, Calgary, Vancouver, Baltimore. To copy the complete list from Wikipedia would take the better part of 2 whole pages of this book. It is so coincidental so as to not be coincidence. Then, following the fires, the cities go through magical rebuilds at a scale that is basically impossible. Something is very odd about these fires. So great is this topic that it demands an entire book of itself, but as such here I will only provide a brief overview. I wanted to start again with the Chicago fire of October 8, 1871, the fire who for over 100 years was claimed to have begun when a wayward cow knocked over a candle. The first thing to realize is this fire was not in isolation. There were 4 great giant fires that very day all along Lake Michigan. In Peshtigo, Wisconsin, where 2,500 people died, Holland, Michigan, and Manistee, Michigan. 4 great fires on the same day in the same general location is too coincidental. Ignatius Donnelly, author and scientist, suggested in the 1880s that the fires must have been caused by a meteor strike. In 2004, physicist Robert Wood named it as Bella's Comet specifically. The story that a running cow could have started the blaze in Chicago is a nice story for kids to believe, so as not have to do any real thinking about it. Yet anyone close to Chicago at the time would have seen through the cow story right away, especially with 3 other serious fires close by. At the Peshtigo fire, a local priest was quoted as suggesting that things came out of the sky causing the fires, which could mean meteors, but it could mean many things. All he said was things coming from the sky. Because what is for sure, when looking at the photos above, we are not seeing fires. And the same becomes true when we look at the photos of all the city fires. When we look at artwork, even when we look at artwork of the 15 and 1600s that depict balls of light falling into burning cities, balls that could even look like modern missiles, we have to ask what has happened. One of the building contractors I met has seen fire damage to many buildings many times in his life. He was very clear when looking at the fire photos of Chicago and several other cities that they were not fires. In fact, he asked me, who bombed this city? Because the damage is not from a fire. Look, all these buildings were stone, not wood, and the stone is flaking off. That's serious damage. A simple fire cannot do this to stone. Take the cathedral in Paris that just burned. Yeah, Notre Dame. The ceiling burned because it was made of wood, but the stone structure of the building turned out fine. A bit of soot damage changed the color, but that's it. Now look at these photos. What's done this to the stone? This really needs to be examined further. Go look at more photos. They can be found all over the internet. Try Portland, Maine, 1866, Boston, 1872, Toronto, 1904. The fires were claimed to have been so bad because all the buildings were built of wood. But when you look at the photos carefully, all I can see is brick and stone, and pulverized brick and stone at that. Again, no char marks, no sign of fire, just battle-damaged stone buildings. I could post photo after photo from city after city, and they would look pretty similar. Again, look at the brick and stone surviving, and how much of it has been, in a sense, turned into powder. Stone, in many cases, has been melted or sliced in half. Meanwhile, trees, electrical poles, and even vegetation remain completely intact. We have two more oddities with the presentation of the city fires. The first is that they cause tremendous damage. Very few people die, often just one or two. Would not more people be swept up, especially when it happens at night, caught in the upper floors of buildings? Maybe the few deaths are a message. We also have the odd photos of people posing for selfies with the destruction going on in the background, such as in San Francisco, or many with military troops standing in front of the fire damage, almost as if they're showing off a trophy. Another is all the Civil War photographs of cities destroyed in the southern U.S. Look carefully at Richmond, Virginia, or other cities. First, what you see are the remnants of spectacular Roman and Greek-style buildings. Then what you see from destruction is not really what would be capable of cannon attacks at that time, unless you took 50 cannons, stood them outside of the buildings, and fired over and over again for hours. This is more like controlled dynamite to the buildings or some other form of high-powered attack. That possibly means the Civil War could be nothing like what we have told, that it may not have even been a real war, but a mop-up operation to destroy architecture in the southern U.S. states and round up remaining survivors. That is how unsure we are about history. When we really look at it with a critical mind, it forces every part of it to be brought up for new examination. Some in the alternative history research community believe that these fires might be plasma discharges from the solar system. Others see them as deliberately started, perhaps by some sort of EMP devices, in order to destroy many of the old ancient buildings in the cities, or at least as a way to kill off the inhabitants very quickly without the need for ground warfare. It is definitely something to think of, for there's, again, almost no U.S. or Canadian city from the 1800s that does not go through a major fire. A few even claim that it was from the result of an H.G. Wells' real-life War of the Worlds alien attack and takeover on Earth. I'm not going to go that far, but again, since we have no idea what really occurred here, even that has to be kept on the tables as possibility. Recall, Wells wrote the story in the 1890s in England, almost at the end of this fire phenomenon. Do I believe that the photos we see of the destruction are genuine? Very much so. But I speculate that the photos are perhaps not in the year claimed, but perhaps hundreds of years previous. Perhaps 1771 for Chicago and 1789 for Seattle. That would allow an extra 100 years to rebuild the destroyed city, which would make more sense from standard building logic. But this is not believed because photography is not supposed to be invented until the 1830s. On the other hand, we have newspaper reports of the fires, usually coming out the next day and offering official narrative reasons for the fire. Cow knocks over bucket, girl is playing with matches, bird knocks over some glue, or some other simple explanations. Never anything is examined or looked at. I may also speculate that the fire disasters are not years apart, happening in every city in North America over a 100-year period. My guess is they might be a continent-wide event that happened over a much shorter time frame. Perhaps it was some sort of continent-wide natural disaster, such as earthquakes, volcanoes, or even actual attacks by an unknown technology. To present all the fires in their correct years would lead to obvious questions, so they spread out the dates to make it look like random events. Well, I cannot prove it yet. The hunches and circumstantial evidence are pointing to the fires coming from some sort of act of war. Well, at this point, it does not seem that anyone else, or I, has the answers as to what really happened in our recent past. All we can tell at this point is that our past, heritage, knowledge, health, and life were all taken from us. All of this knowledge was being gotten rid of, be they native Indians, Cathars, Romans, ancient Egyptians, Americans, Tartarians, you name it. The population of ancient Rome might have all been getting slaughtered at the same moment, just as at different places all over the earth with different names. I've often hated to read books that pose a number of very interesting problems and questions, but then never seem to offer much in the way of answers to those issues at the end of their book. Documentaries are famous for this. They hook in the reader-viewer at the beginning by promising to answer the unsolved question of whatever the subject is, from pyramids to Custer to Stalingrad, yet nothing is ever answered. The difference here, I hope, is that I did not start at the beginning of this book by saying I had answers. What I did have was enough evidence to present the standard history of the last 200 years of most of our timeline as a giant lie. I, of course, did not get into such recent events, such as the JFK assassination, the moon landings, the exploration of Antarctica, and other recent history that needs to be fully examined. But what needs to be understood is that all of those recent lies all come out of the period prior, 1776 to 1945. That period of time is the foundation of everything that has come after in our world. I am hopeful more deeper answers will appear as this research investigation into the historical lies of our past continues. Of course, truth eventually will be revealed, but it might take a long time for that to occur. I am just touching this subject briefly, but I do feel that it needs far more attention and study. The fairs are a piece of the puzzle, and a piece to me that seems to have another giant puzzle is also sitting in the ruins in downtown Rome.